This is a great one, guys. It's basically a new perspective on the Laci Peterson case. This is narrated and investigated by Stephanie Harlow. I was captivated, and I think you will too. Please take the time to visit Stephanie's channel. The link will be in the description box. Also, I want you to know that the channel name has changed from Cassie's Hope to True Crime Connection. I felt that Cassie's Hope was a little soft for a true crime channel. Thanks, guys. If you don't mind, leave a comment in the comment box. I appreciate you. Bye-bye.
Let's get started on the video. I gave you guys a little hint at the end of my last video that we were going to be doing Laci Peterson next. And why am I doing a Laci Peterson video for Mystery Monday? The reason is at this point, Scott Peterson is appealing his guilty verdict, and he is saying still, and has said from the beginning, that he's not guilty, that he did not do this. And I'm pretty sure everybody, didn't believe him at first. I definitely always thought he was guilty. And I kind of still do. I went into this research and looking into this case thinking he was guilty, as did everybody else in the world, right? So when I'm getting requests to do the Laci Peterson case because Scott Peterson might not be guilty, to me, that's mysterious. To me, that deserves a second look. So I decided to look at this case with fresh eyes and open mind. Yes, I have my biases, of course, just like Casey Anthony, but I can look at a case and look at the evidence and look what is out there to be seen, and I can look at both sides of a story and try to figure out what's the truth, right? Because there's always three sides to every story. What one person believes, what the other person believes, and what the truth is. So hopefully I'm trying to determine what I think the truth might be after looking at what Scott says and what everybody else says. And I'm going to try to tackle this in an unbiased way. I'm going to try to tackle this in a way where I'm looking at it as if I've never seen it before. But I'm going to give you my opinion as I go along, what I find to be suspicious, the things that he's doing that I don't find to be suspicious, that everybody says is suspicious, things like that. And I really encourage you to let me know in the comments if you agree with me or you disagree with me on these points. So everybody out there who's going to say, like, why are you even doing this video? You're stupid, Stephanie, stupid. Scott Peterson's guilty as sin. I agree with you. However, there's a lot of stuff that came out since that kind of showed things were happening in the case that we didn't know about, that we weren't told by the media. I kind of feel like the media and the police, who went so hard for Scott since day one, they ignored some of the things that may have made him look less guilty. So we'll see at the end of this video, or these series of videos, because of course this is a series, we can't just cover Laci Peterson in one video. We're gonna see at the end how we all feel. Now I'm gonna say, as I usually do, if you're looking for a Wikipedia recitation of the Laci Peterson case and the Scott Peterson case, this is not the video or series of videos for you. This is going to be full of information, details, times, dates. I'm trying to get everything out there so that we can almost look at this case like a jury who had gotten all the information, and we can kind of decide afterwards. I'm trying to get everything out there. Am I gonna miss some things? Yes, but I promise you I will do my best to get everything in here. On Christmas Eve in 2002, Laci Peterson, who was 8 months pregnant with her first child, disappeared from her hometown of Modesto, California. On April 13th, 2003, the bodies of Laci and her son Connor were found washed up on the shore of the San Francisco Bay, a mile away from each other. What happened to Laci and Connor? How did a normal, happy, soon-to-be mother and her highly anticipated son end up having their lives snuffed out so soon and with seemingly no reason? Laci's husband, Scott Peterson, is currently sitting on death row after being found guilty for the murders of his unborn son and wife. He still proclaims his innocence, and 13 years after being convicted of the murders, he appealed his sentence, claiming his lawyers mishandled his trial and asking for another one. I have to say that the similarities between what happened with Laci and Scott Peterson and what happened with Shanann and Chris Watts are sometimes almost creepy as I went through this case again. I looked into the Peterson case years ago, a couple years after it first happened, and I remembered a lot of stuff from it, but not the small details. When I'm going through the small details, knowing how entrenched I was in the Watts case and how I pretty much knew everything inside and out about that case, it really started to strike me in an unsettling way. How similar these incidences were, how similar the murders of these women were. The dynamics in the relationship, just their lives in general, how the husbands acted before and after. It's like I'm reliving the Watts case all over again. So bear with me. I will from time to time make a comment and say this reminds me a lot of Chris Watts, and I'm not trying to take away from Laci Peterson at all, but it's so stunning how similar they are. Obviously, Chris Watts to me is much of a worse case because of the fact that Bella and Celeste, Chris's two daughters, were murdered as well. I just find that it would be a lot harder and it would take a lot more of a psychopathic, cold-hearted killer to murder his two daughters that he's been raising for years. Not that it doesn't take a cold-hearted psychopath to kill his wife and the child she's pregnant with, but you understand what I mean, right? I know you're going to come for me in the comments, those of you who like to pick apart everything I say, like, oh, so Chris Watts is worse than Scott Peterson, so you're on Scott Peterson's side. No, obviously that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I feel like it would take a more evil person to do what Chris Watts did. Let's move on. Now you guys know how I roll. In order to truly get perspective on somebody, why they do the things they do, their personality, the way they act, you have to go back to the beginning, their childhood. With Scott Peterson, I felt like I had to go back even further. On December 20th, 1945, a man named John H. Latham was struck on the skull with a pipe and murdered for $200 by an ex-employee of his in a salvage yard that he owned in San Diego, California. He was a married father of 4, and his only daughter, Jackie, was 2.5 when he was murdered. Shortly after, Jackie's mother had a mental breakdown from the stress of losing her husband in such a violent way and being left alone with 4 children to raise. And she took the 4 kids and placed them in the Nazareth house, which was basically an orphanage. Since Jackie was the only girl, she was separated from her 3 brothers. So imagine this little toddler girl, 2.5 years old, my Bella's age. She loses her father, then her mother, and then her 3 brothers, all in what I'm sure felt like overnight to her. This would be extremely traumatic, especially at this age. This little girl was Jackie Peterson, Scott Peterson's mother. 10 years later, when she was 13, Jackie would go back to live with her mother. But her mother, Helen, would die soon after Jackie graduated, on January 17th, 1962. Jackie bounced around at that point, searching for love and giving it to all the men who didn't deserve it. She soon became pregnant with her first son, Don, and after the baby's father abandoned her, she gave Don up for adoption in April of 1963. She became pregnant with another child, this time a daughter, named Anne, in 1964. But the father of Anne was already involved in another relationship with another woman, and he didn't want to have anything to do with Jackie or her daughter. So Jackie gave Anne up for adoption as well in July of 1965. She became pregnant with another son before being abandoned by this child's father as well. When she found out at the doctor's office that she was pregnant, the doctor basically looked at her and said, listen, lady, this time, you should probably keep this one. You can't just keep giving your kids up for adoption. Have you ever thought about raising this one?
Hey there. I guess my Siri impression is working, even when I'm not trying. I can also do an impression of a toaster.
I imagine you can.
So that's what happens when I try to ask Siri how to pronounce La Jolla, California. My Google Home and Siri start arguing about who is better. Super strange. So Jackie became a single parent and she opened a dress shop in La Jolla, California called The Put On. It was said that she would often bring her son John with her to work and that his needs would often be overlooked for the needs of the business, but I don't know if that's true. It's just what people said. She met Lee Peterson, a divorced father of 3. Lee grew up very poor and worked for a trucking company before starting a successful packing and delivering business in San Diego, California. He was ashamed of his humble beginnings and made every effort to hide the fact that he had come from nothing, overcompensating with fancy cars and expensive homes, which of course led to financial strain. Lee was described by his family, so the people who knew him best, as private, introverted, didn't really know himself that well, wasn't really comfortable with emotions. It is rumored that his first marriage ended because he wasn't even really comfortable around his own kids. Like, he didn't really have any interest in interacting with them at all. Jackie and Lee got married. He adopted her son, John. And a year later, on October 24th, 1972, Scott Peterson was brought into the world. He was actually delivered by C-section, and he had to be put on oxygen and separated from his mother right after he was born because he had pneumonia. Scott would go on to be known as the Golden Boy by his family and his parents and his siblings, even though Jackie had one son already and Lee Peterson had 3 children. Scott was clearly their favorite, and they put him on a pedestal. His mother fondly likes to remember that it took him a while to learn to walk because somebody was always carrying him. In 1976, when Scott was 4, the family moved to Scripps Ranch, which was a nicer suburban area in San Diego than they were currently living in La Jolla. Lee would often take little Scott to work with him to deliver packages, and he said it made him feel like he had a little buddy with him, like he wasn't alone. He also made an effort to get Scott interested in the things that he was interested in, like fishing and hunting and golf, especially golf. And the reason he gave for including his son in on these things and bringing him to work was because he said it thought it would be easier for him to spend time with his son and connect with his son if Scott was interested in his hobbies and the same things that Lee liked to do. So basically you try to mold somebody into like your duplicate so that you would like them better because you like yourself so much. That's what I got out of it, but I could be wrong. Jackie's older son got into some trouble in high school, and the family basically disowned him, and they sent him out of the state to live with relatives. Now, let's just unpack this for a minute. I'm obviously not sure what kind of trouble John got into. It could have been really bad. But his family disowned him for getting in trouble in high school, which I think is pretty common for kids in high school to do, get into trouble. I got into tons. And sent him away to live somewhere else. And yet Scott was placed on a pedestal, brought along with his father to work. He, taught him to play golf and taught him to fish and hunt and would bring him everywhere with him. Well, was he doing that stuff with John as well? Or was he not doing that stuff with John because John was not his actual son, it was his adopted son. And when John got into some trouble, it kind of was the perfect time to send him away and erase the mistakes of Jackie's past. And so I just want you to see what kind of family dynamic we have here. That it's kind of toxic, I think. That it's probably not the best way to raise kids. Not productive, emotionally healthy children. But anyways, let's move on. So Scott was given most of the attention, right? Especially after John got sent away, because now it was basically like on him. He had these high expectations. He had to make his family proud. He was the only son left, basically. John was gone. We don't even know him anymore. He's in a different state. Like, you have to carry on our legacy now. This is all on you. And apparently he handled this pressure very well and rose to the occasion. Scott Peterson was in the Cub Scouts, and his mother was his troop leader. Some of the other parents in his troop would describe Scott as a little bit different than the rest of the kids. He was very polite. He was very sweet, but he was quiet and preferred to kind of stay to himself, whereas their kids were running around, like normal 6 and 7-year-olds being crazy, climbing trees. Scott preferred to kind of hang back and quietly watch. But something that people do remember about Scott, even in those days, was his huge smile. How easily he would smile, how big his smile was, and how it would light up his entire face. When Scott was in the 5th grade, the family upgraded their living arrangements once more, always trying to keep up with the Joneses, and they actually bought a really spacious, nice house in Poway. It had a swimming pool in the backyard. It had a nice, big backyard that backed up into a creek, so it was probably a very nice place for young kids to grow up. He was chosen by his teachers at Painted Rock Middle School to do some crossing guard duties before and after school. So he would be the kid who had to wear the orange vest and would have to, kind of tell kids not to cross the road yet because cars were coming, and he took his responsibility very seriously once again. And people would be mad because he wouldn't let anybody cross, and the cars were like a mile away still, but he was very cautious, and he would say like, hold on, and all the parents would get frustrated. And Jackie remembers one parent saying, come on, he never lets anybody cross. In his teens, Scott worked at a country club in Rancho Santa Fe, and he spent some time there taking lessons on his downtime and learning to perfect his swing and his golf game. Of course, Lee Peterson was very proud of his son's natural ability with golf, and I'd have to say, Lee, it's probably not a natural ability with golf since you've been shoving a golf club in his hand since he could probably walk. But anyways, he saw potential in him, and he made a promise that he would buy his son a Ferrari if he could shoot par. Now, my husband's a golfer. I am not. I find it incredibly boring. But I don't know what shooting par means. I don't know if it's hard to achieve. I have to think it would be. Scott really wanted that Ferrari, so he busted his ass so that he could finally shoot par, and he did when he was 16. He was handed keys to a car. His dad kept his promise, but it wasn't a Ferrari. It was a much less expensive, much more appropriate car for a 16-year-old boy. Regardless, he got a free car for being good at golf. In high school, he was named the golf team's MVP twice. And for the most part, he was remembered by his classmates by being a basic nice guy. He wore polo shirts and Letterman jackets. Yeah, maybe he was a little arrogant, but not any more arrogant than any other high school kid who wore polo shirts and Letterman jackets. His golf coach in high school remembers him as being very polite and never swearing, never using bad words, always in control of his emotions. So like the other boys on the team, they would shoot badly and then they would throw their club and swear up a storm and stomp over to the next hole. Coach said when Scott maybe shot poorly, he just calmly moved on to the next one and shot again. He didn't show any emotion. He didn't show any anger. He was always in control of his temper. After graduation, he received a scholarship to play golf at Arizona State University, but he left after only one semester. Now, I have heard it say that he got into trouble in school. He got one of the other kids on the golf team in trouble with drinking and partying, and he was asked to leave, but I'm not sure if that's actually true because I couldn't find it corroborated by multiple sources. But he did leave after one semester and he went back to California. He attended Cuesto College, which is a community college in San Luis Obispo, and he was there for about a year before he transferred again. He then attended California Polytechnic State University, where he majored in agricultural business. He shared a bachelor pad style apartment with friends, and they actually put fake artificial grass on top of their flat roof so they could all go up to the roof and drink beers and, hit golf balls into a nearby field. All his professors at Cal Poly once again loved him. They said he was respectful. He was smart. He was polite. One of his professors said, I would take a class full of Scott Petersons. While he attended school, he supported himself and paid for his tuition by working several jobs. He worked at some golf courses and country clubs, but he also worked at a place called the Pacific Cafe in Morro Bay. And that is where he crossed paths with a beautiful, outgoing brunette named Laci Rocha. Laci was a bundle of energy and light and excitement, all wrapped up in a 5'1" frame with dark hair, dark eyes, and a beautiful smile with these amazing dimples. She might have been a little thing. 5'1" is short. It's 3 inches shorter than me, and I think I'm short. But she was strong, she was willful, she wasn't afraid of anything. Her mother, Sharon, recalls Laci being such a good kid right from the beginning. It was 2 days after she'd been brought home from the hospital that she was sleeping through the night. And my daughter is 2.5 years old and still doesn't. When she was young, she learned to love to grow things and to plant. She spent a lot of time working with her mother in their garden, and she learned everything about flowers and plants and how to make things grow and make things live. The family owned a dairy farm, and Laci became very comfortable on the dairy farm. She would help out with the manure and milking the cows. She and her brother Brent would just spend time finding things to keep them occupied on the farm, which ended up being a lot of fun because it was always an adventure. Her mom said Laci was a big fan of movies, and she would watch the same movies that she loved over and over and over again. Like, she would never get tired of them, especially Superman. She loved Superman. And Laci's mom said it was almost fun watching these movies with Laci over and over because Laci would react as if she was just seeing it for the first time. She would laugh like she'd never seen the movie before, and when something happened that made her sad or emotional, she would cry, even if she'd already seen the movie 15 or 20 times. Sharon would have to screen the movies that Laci would watch because she would get so emotional and upset at what seemed to be the smallest thing. And it reminds me so much of Aiden. He gets like that with movies. He can't watch Moana anymore because her father yelled at her at one point and he, broke down. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, forget about it. He will never watch that movie again. I made him watch it with me once because it was one of my favorite Disney movies growing up. And when Quasimodo came down from the bell tower for like the Feast of Fools and everybody had masks on and they were dancing and he was happy, and then they like unmasked him and started throwing things at him and bullying him and like throwing food and fruit at him, Aiden had like a mental breakdown. Like, was sobbing. He was like grabbing the remote controller to turn it off. He just couldn't deal with it and see it. It hurt him inside so bad. But let me just say, the sensitive kids, when they're like 6, 7, 8, and they feel horror when they see somebody else being abused, those are the kids that grow up to be the strongest social justice warriors. Don't discourage that kind of behavior in your kids, because I know people do that, especially with boys. Sharon and her husband Dennis Rocha divorced when the kids were still young, and this was hard for Laci and her brother Brent, but they actually became much closer because of it. It's a very common dynamic when kids are going through their parents' divorce together, that they actually form a stronger bond because they depend on each other and lean on each other. And even in the later days when Laci was missing, you could tell how much her brother Brent really loved her and cared for her and was worried about her. The kids went to live with Sharon in Modesto, California, but they would still go back to the dairy farm on weekends and spend time with their father. Brent remembers Laci would often want to hang out with him and his friends, which he didn't mind because he liked her. They were close. But when she became about 13, 14, he started to think it wasn't such a good idea because his friends would tell him, your sister's really cute. And he'd be like, nope. Laci was the typical fun-loving teenager in high school. She was a cheerleader. She had a tight-knit group of friends. They would go to sporting events together at the school. They would have sleepovers where they would sneak champagne after the parents had fallen asleep and then end up being hungover the next day. Her friends describe her as perky, energetic, bubbly, and chatty, and she never changed from high school to college. She was studying ornamental horticulture at Cal Poly, and ornamental horticulture is actually the study of how to grow and arrange plants and flowers in a pleasing sort of way, I guess, for decorative purposes. So you would see somebody like this going on to be like an event planner or a florist or a wedding planner or a caterer or something like that. But it says a lot about Laci's personality. Her mother said Laci was born to be a housewife, was a natural born housewife. And not all of us are, I promise you. She loved to cook. She loved to decorate the home to make it look, aesthetically pleasing. She loved taking care of people. She loved entertaining and having friends over and making these, delicious meals that they could enjoy. Even in college, she was more mature than the normal college girl. Her brother and her stayed close even when she went to college. And he would often drive down to visit her at school. And he said instead of taking him to keg parties, she was taking him on wine tastings. She was mature. She knew what she wanted in life. She knew who she was. She didn't need to find it in the living room of some fraternity while she was doing a keg stand. She had a more refined taste. She had a more mature outlook. And she didn't really feel like she needed to waste her time doing things that she knew wasn't going to get her anywhere. Scott and Laci's paths crossed when she had lunch at the cafe he worked at. She must have spotted him from across the room, saw his natural way with people, his big smile, the way that he was charming everybody because he was working for tips. And she actually gave her number to a friend of hers who worked there and said, give it to this guy. And the other server, Laci's friend, gave it to Scott, but Scott threw it away initially. He thought it was just a joke. He'd seen her. He thought she was beautiful. He thought she was out of his league, and he thought that they were playing a trick on him. But she went back to the cafe, and she asked him, basically, she was like that, straightforward, and she said, why didn't you call me? I gave you my number. And they then started dating after this. Now, Laci called her mother Sharon before they had even gone on their first date. And she said, listen, Mom, I've met the man that I'm going to marry. You need to get down here immediately and meet him. And Sharon was like, well, did you go on a first date yet? And Laci said, no, but we will. And they did go on their first date that very same week. Scott took Laci deep sea fishing, which is something that he was very interested in, right, from his childhood and spending time with his father, who forced his hobbies onto Scott. But Laci, not so much. And it strikes me again, the dynamic is strange. Did Scott learn this from his father? That in order to be with somebody, you had to kind of make them like the same things you liked, or they'd be intolerable to be with? Or was he just trying to show off to Laci to say, hey, I have these highbrow hobbies, look at me? A much better first date would have been maybe, dinner and a movie. Sit down, have a meal with her, talk to her, see what kind of things that she likes to do, see what kind of things she's interested in. And maybe you wouldn't have taken her deep sea fishing on a first date where she would spend the entire time seasick on the boat because she doesn't like being on boats. And she would have told you she don't like being on boats, and then you would have known not to take her on that date. But maybe I'm looking into it a little too far. Sharon Rocha drove down to visit her daughter at school the weekend after Laci and Scott's first date. And she and Laci had lunch at the Pacific Cafe where Scott worked, and he had already set their table up for him. He had 24 roses on the table, 12 red for Laci and 12 white for Sharon. Scott knew how important Laci's family was to her. Scott knew how much value Laci placed in the family unit and in her own family. So he was being smart. If he wanted approval for his new relationship from the mother, he had to charm the pants off of her. Any mother would, be happy to see her daughter be courted and wined and dined like that. And then to receive roses of your own, he's including you in on it, not just showering your daughter with roses. Yeah, it's gonna impress the mother. And it did. Everyone who knew the couple in those early days could not say enough how much in love they were. They spent every moment together. And they were dating for about 2 years before Scott proposed. They got married in a beautiful outdoor ceremony with 150 of their closest friends and family just 2 months before Laci graduated from college. And from the outside perspective, it looked as if they were the perfect match. Both attractive people with big, happy smiles, educated, outgoing, and motivated to make life everything they wanted. After college, the two embarked on an adventure together. They went into business together. They turned an old bakery in a strip mall into a burger place that they called The Shack. They wanted it to become the place for the nearby college students to come on the weekends and hang out and get a burger and a beer. Scott used knowledge that he gained from working at the Pacific Cafe to get discounts on food and to buy used kitchen equipment. Laci used her interior and exterior design skills to turn the place into a really cool but also upscale kind of environment. There was peanuts on every table, but she also turned an old wine barrel into a garbage can. She had cool hand-painted signs on driftwood. There was an old fisherman's box that was posted over the entrance. It was just a really cool place, and it became the popular college hangout that they had wanted it to be. And they were both go-getters. They were young. They were just out of college, and they were opening a restaurant. They were embarking on something that's tough. 9 out of 10 restaurants do not make it past the first year, but they were so sure in themselves, and they were a partnership. They worked together. When Scott wasn't able to find anyone nearby who would install a vent that they needed to pass inspection, he went to LA and he got the certification that he needed to install the vent on his own. And Laci was the perfect hostess. Scott said they already loved entertaining at home. She loved cooking, they loved grilling out, they loved having people over. And he said, why wouldn't we open a restaurant where we can do all that stuff we already enjoy, stuff we're already doing, and get paid for it? In 2000, the couple sold their now profitable and busy restaurant for a profit, for a good amount of money, and they decided to move to Modesto, where Laci was born. It was time to start a family. They had had their fun, they'd been to college, they'd run a restaurant, they'd spend nights drinking and partying with friends, and now Laci really wanted to start a family. There are rumors that Scott was not so keen on this, that he'd kind of put it off for a while, that he really didn't ever want kids. But Laci did, and so they started trying. The move to Modesto was Laci's idea. Her family was there. Her core group of friends from high school was there. She thought it would be a much better place to raise a family with people around who would be loving and supportive of them. In October, they purchased a home on Covina Avenue for $177,000. Scott went to work for a Spanish-based agricultural supply company called TradeCorp as their West Coast representative. His clients were made up of big farmers and flower growers in Arizona, California, and New Mexico. And because he had sales clients in a lot of different states, he often had to travel and go out of town and stay out of town for a couple of days for work. Laci began working as a substitute teacher, but her main objective was to turn the new house into a home that was fit for the husband that she loved and the children that she knew she would love. She planted a flower garden outside, and they installed a swimming pool and a fence in the backyard. Scott joined a nearby country club. Laci would have lunch dates with her friends from high school. They were living what seemed to be a really good life. They seemed happy. Everything was fine. It was all going the right way. In 2002, the Petersons became pregnant with their first child, a boy who would be named Connor Peterson. His nursery was decorated in a blue and white nautical theme, which is so sad considering what would end up happening and where he would be found. The holiday season arrived in Modesto and at the Peterson house, and Laci decorated their home for Christmas in between attending prenatal visits and Lamaze classes with her husband Scott. The day before Christmas Eve was a normal day for Laci and Scott. Laci has a half-sister named Amy, so they share the same father but not the same mother, and Amy is 6 years younger than Laci, and she actually worked at a hair salon in Modesto where both Scott and Laci would go to get their hair done. Day before Christmas Eve, they went to go see Amy that night to get Scott's hair cut. Amy had worked her normal shift that day, and then she left the salon to go to a local fruit stand or kind of a farmer's market and order a fruit basket that they were going to be giving their grandfather for Christmas. So she ordered all the kinds of stuff that she wanted in it, and then they were going to assemble the basket, and somebody would have to come back the next day between 12 and 3 when they closed to pick the basket up, the next day being Christmas Eve. When she got back to the salon, Scott and Laci were waiting there for her, and she sat them down and started cutting Scott's hair. And while she was cutting Scott's hair, she talked to Laci about plans for tomorrow and mentioned she had to pick that basket up between 12 and 3. And Scott offered to pick it up for her. He said, I'm already going to be out. I'm going to go golfing tomorrow, so I'll be out that way anyways, and I'll grab it for you. And Amy was relieved because she was working again a full shift the next day from 6:30 to 2:30 p.m. So she didn't really want to cut it down to the wire where she wouldn't be able to get the basket because she had to leave work late, and it was just going to save her a trip. So she gladly accepted his offer to help. Amy says Laci was wearing a black top with cream-colored flowers on it, cream capri pants, a black jacket, and a cream scarf. After Amy finished Scott's hair, Laci wanted to know how to style her hair in the way where it would flip out at the ends. And so basically Amy got a curling iron and a flat iron and tried to show Laci the way to do it. And they were kind of laughing and having fun with that. Scott then invited Amy over that night for dinner. He said they were going to grab pizza and watch football and asked if she wanted to come, but Amy said she already had plans, so she passed. Now from here on out, this is mostly going to be Scott Peterson's word. He says they left the salon around 6:30. They stopped and grabbed a pizza on the way home. When they got home, they ate the pizza and they watched Monday Night Football. After this, they got ready for bed in their pajamas. Laci was wearing Scott's blue pajama bottoms. They got into bed and they watched a movie in bed, The Rookie. After that, they went to sleep. Now this would have been about 11:30, he believes, that they fell asleep. Also on the night of the 23rd, around 8:30, Laci made a call to her mother confirming Christmas Eve dinner for the next night because they were going to be having Christmas Eve dinner with Laci's parents. So now we find ourselves on the morning of the 24th. Scott says Laci got up around 7 a.m. She got dressed. She threw his blue pajama bottoms that she'd been wearing to bed the night before in the hamper, where they were found by the police later. And she went downstairs to have some cereal. Scott said she had to eat as soon as she got up because she was pregnant, and if she didn't eat as soon as she got up, she would be nauseous. Scott got up around 8 o'clock and he went downstairs where he had a bowl of cereal, and Laci sat with him while she ate a piece of toast. Scott planned on going golfing that day, so he took a shower, and as he was getting dressed, Laci talked with him about her plans for that day. She was making a French toast bake for Christmas morning brunch, and she knew that the bread had to be marinated in the egg mixture for several hours, like something from 8 to 20 hours has to be marinated in this egg mixture before you can bake it. So she wanted to go to the store on that day, Christmas Eve day, so she could get the stuff she needed for the French toast bake and she could marinate the bread. The recipe for this French toast bake thing was found on the countertop of the Petersons' home. She said she also wanted to walk the dog that day, their dog Mackenzie. She walked Mackenzie every single morning. It was the way she stayed active during her pregnancy. And she said she was going to mop the floor and make gingerbread cookies. Scott then says he saw Laci in the bathroom sitting on a bench that she would bring into the bathroom because she was having some swelling with her legs and her feet from the pregnancy, so she liked to sit down while she was doing her hair and her makeup. So he saw her sitting on this bench trying to flip her hair and style it in the way that her sister had shown her the night before. And when Scott talked to Sharon later, Laci's mother, he said he recalls her sitting there because he thought, how cute does she look sitting on that bench trying to flip her hair up? Now, the reason this timeline is so important is because later on, Scott would be accused of killing Laci on the 23rd of December. The prosecution would go so hard on the fact that they believed Scott Peterson had killed Laci Peterson on the 23rd of December. So all these things happening in the morning when I say the recipe was on the counter, showing she was going to make a French toast bake. The pajama pants that she took off that she wore the night before were in the hamper. These are things that are all supposedly supporting that Scott is innocent, or at least that he didn't kill her on the 23rd. And I don't believe that she was killed on the 23rd. When the cops came in later that day, they would find the bench in the bathroom, just like he said, and Laci's curling iron sitting on the bathroom sink, unplugged, but the plug was like stretched and reaching towards the outlet that would have been above the toilet. Now, the Petersons have a housekeeper who I guess came through once a week, and the housekeeper said she'd been there the day before, and there was no bench in the bathroom, and there was no curling iron on the counter. At this point, Scott says he loaded 3 large patio umbrellas into the back of his truck. He wanted to bring them to his warehouse to store, and a neighbor actually saw him loading these umbrellas into his truck. She waved at him, he waved at her and said good morning, and he seemed completely fine. There are some reports, though, that he seemed to be loading these umbrellas in on top of a bunch of other stuff in the truck, but none of these reports or sightings could be really validated. Scott went back inside and filled the mop bucket for Laci so she could mop the kitchen floor, and he says she was watching Martha Stewart at the time, which is her favorite show, and as he was getting ready to leave, he heard Martha Stewart mention something about meringue, or making meringue, or something like that. As Laci started to mop the floor, Scott kissed her goodbye. He left the house between 9:30 and 10 a.m. But here's my question. If they had a maid or a housekeeper who had just been in the day before, why would Laci be mopping the floor that morning if the housekeeper or the maid, whatever, had been in the day before? Did the housekeeper not mop the floor? Was Laci just a super clean person? Which I know she was. She was meticulous about the way she kept her house, which is exactly the way that Shanann Watts was as well. I always wondered how Shanann Watts kept her house so clean and picked up with 2 kids, because I cannot seem to do it. But Laci was meticulous about the way her house was kept. It was very clean, it was very organized, so maybe she just mopped the floor every day, but that's not something that we really know that she did, so it would just be speculation at this point. Okay, so a lot of people, including Nancy Grace, who was very vocal about the Peterson case, they think it was odd that Scott would leave his pregnant wife to go fishing or golfing or whatever he ended up doing on Christmas Eve. I personally do not think that's odd. To me, it would be odd now to do that because I have kids. And if my husband wanted to go fishing or golfing on Christmas Eve, I'd be like, no, this is time to spend with your kids. But if we were single, if my husband and I, we didn't have kids, it was just us, and my husband wanted to go golfing on Christmas Eve, I would have no problem with that because I probably have a ton of stuff to do, and it's easier for him to be out of the house and out of my way and not distracting me anyways. It's a lot different when you have kids. Christmas Eve takes on a different kind of family aspect. But during the day on Christmas Eve, before they were going to go to dinner with her family at their house, I don't see any problem with Scott going golfing or going fishing or doing something for himself. I don't think that's suspicious. She was pregnant, yes, but she was also a grown woman, and she didn't need to be babysat by her husband. He didn't need to stay home and watch her to make sure she didn't, eat a crayon or poke her eye out. It was a 9-minute drive from the Peterson home to the warehouse that Scott Peterson rented to use to store his boat and also as a little office space. During the time he was driving, phone records show he checked his voicemail at 10:08 and he received a voicemail from his boss. He arrived at his warehouse and he logged directly into his computer where he checked his email. He also wrote an email to his boss in reference to the voicemail he had just heard in the car. And this is all proven and shown in records that he did log on, that he did check his email, that he received the voicemail, that he sent the email. This is all confirmed. So he was at this point at his warehouse. He also Googled instructions on how to assemble a certain woodworking tool he had just received on December 20th in the mail. Now, there's approximately a 20-minute time period where Scott's whereabouts or what he's doing are unaccounted for between the time when he logged off the computer and when he left the warehouse. But the woodworking tool that he had just Googled instructions on how to assemble was fully assembled, so it is fair to say that he could have been putting that together in that 20-minute period. He also pulled up the roll-up door in the warehouse. His car or his truck was parked outside and the boat was parked inside, and then he started to unload some tools from his truck into the warehouse. He says at this point he reached into his toolbox and he cut his finger on one of the tools and he was bleeding, and there was a spot of blood found on the door of his car. Here's something I found interesting, because every time you hear the word warehouse, like Scott Peterson had a warehouse, I imagine this huge, vast, like massive room with high ceilings, and it's just huge. But this warehouse was not really that big. It was more like a small garage or one of those storage centers, you know, like Storage Wars, where there's these rooms and then you can store things in them. It was more like that size. It was just big enough to hold his boat and like a desk and a computer. So it wasn't massive at all. He would not have had enough room to pull his truck into the warehouse and hook the boat up there. He had to pull his truck up to the rolly door that he opened and then hook his boat up like that. You know, the boat was inside, the truck was outside, and he would hook them together and then pull the boat out. So for the people who say that Laci's body was put into the boat from the truck when it was in the warehouse, he would have had to have done that, move her body from the truck to the boat in broad daylight. So I'm not sure how busy that strip mall was, if there was other businesses that were open, if the door to his warehouse was facing other businesses, but that is something to think of that I really didn't know before. I'd always pictured it as a bigger warehouse where he could kind of pull the truck in, do whatever he had to do, and then pull out and nobody would ever be the wiser. The Berkeley Marina was one of the marinas on the San Francisco Bay and is about 90 minutes away from Scott's warehouse. While he's at the warehouse, one of the Petersons' neighbors, Karen Service, she sees the dog, Mackenzie, walking around the neighborhood, wandering about with its leash and its collar still on. And she knows the dog, she knows the Petersons, so she grabs the dog and she puts Mackenzie in the backyard of the Petersons' home and closes the gates so Mackenzie can't get back out. Scott Peterson gets to the marina and he has a ticket that shows he parked there, and he has a launch ticket to show that he launched his boat from there. So this is his proof that he was actually at this marina when he said he was. He says he went north about 2 miles before he found himself by a little island that had a sign on it that said no landing, and there was some litter and garbage on the island and broken piers, and he thought that that would be a good shallow place to try to troll. I guess that's something you do. I'm not sure it's a fishing term, but troll. So he wanted to troll there, so he anchored himself down, allegedly, and he started trolling in the area. Now this island, we would later find out, is Brooks Island, so they say he was there where he said he was by Brooks Island because he was able to describe the island and what it looked like and where it was and all that jazz. According to Scott, he'd forgotten his saltwater lures that he just purchased in his truck. And this bag of saltwater lures was found in the truck, in the bag, just like he'd said it was. So he used some freshwater jigs that he had in his tackle box, even though San Francisco Bay is obviously saltwater. He says he trolled for a little bit before he was getting wet and nothing was really happening. He wasn't catching anything, so he headed back to the marina. Like I said, police would later find the bag with the new lures in Scott's truck, as he'd said. They also found a fishing pole in the bottom of his boat. There was a price tag to the fishing pole on the bottom of his boat. He had just purchased this fishing pole on December 20th. And a lot of people like to use this evidence as saying, let's see, he really was out there fishing. Or he bought a fishing pole like 4 days ago and put it in the boat so that it would look as if he was fishing. That seems more likely to me, because if he's a fisherman, if he's somebody who likes to go fishing, wouldn't he already have a fishing pole that he needed to use to go fishing in San Francisco Bay? When Scott got back to the marina, he claims that he talked to a couple guys who asked him, like, how was it out there? And he talked to them for a little bit, and these witnesses, or these people that he spoke to, they were never really verified. And then he also said that there was some maintenance men nearby who were getting a good laugh out of him trying to back the trailer down the ramp towards the boat to get it hooked back up. And those guys did actually say that they did see somebody matching his description struggling to get their boat hooked up to the truck that day. Now let me just pause here and say, I don't think that it was ever a question whether Scott went out on the boat that day. I think the question was whether he went out there with the explicit intention to fish. To which I would say he certainly was there that day. I totally believe it. But I do not think he was in the boat fishing. His family claims that Scott has been an avid fisherman since he was young. But that doesn't really say anything about Scott Peterson in adulthood. Scott fishing in adulthood was not so common. In fact, the boat that he actually used that day, he had just purchased that on December 9th. And he used cash. I think it was $1,400 in cash he paid for this like 14-foot aluminum boat. And the last time he'd had a year-long fishing license was 1994. Now you can buy 2-day passes. The difference between buying a 2-day pass and a year pass is the 2-day pass is about $11 to $12 and the year pass is $30. So if somebody's going to fish more than, once a year, they'd probably go with the year pass because they're gonna make up their money. Now, if Scott wasn't going to be fishing more than once a year, I wouldn't call him an avid fisherman. Additionally, and this is the most striking and suspicious piece of evidence that we have talked about yet, or I think that we will talk about going forward. He did have a fishing license, but it was a 2-day fishing license, which he had to have applied for in advance, and then he'd have to give them dates on which to put on the license. And he had applied for a fishing license that was for December 24th and December 25th in advance. So he had it when he went fishing that day. So he buys a boat on December 9th. He buys a fishing pole on December 20th. And at some point between those 2 dates, he applies for a fishing license for December 24th and December 25th for him to go out on the water for roughly an hour and a half. Does that make sense? Because here's the problem. Scott had told everybody he was going golfing that day. Even after Laci ended up missing, the first couple of people he spoke to, he told them he'd been golfing that day. Yet he says when he got to his warehouse, he realized it was too cold and he changed his mind and he just bought this boat and he wanted to get it out in the water and see how it was on the water. How spur of the moment could this let's get the boat on the water trip have been if you had applied for a fishing license for this specific date in advance? Right there, to me, that's the thing that makes him the most guilty out of anything. And according to Laci's family, they didn't even know that Scott had bought this boat. It was a secret boat, and they didn't think Laci knew about it either. Even Scott's own father, Lee Peterson, didn't know that Scott had purchased a boat. But Lee said it was pretty common for Scott to make big ticket purchases like this and not tell anybody. I guess, but nobody knew he had this boat, allegedly. It was a secret boat that he stored in his warehouse. Nobody knew about it, and he told everybody he was going golfing that day, not fishing. Scott said he thinks he was out on the water for about 90 minutes from Scott's arrival time at the marina and the time where his cell phone shows him leaving the marina. It was about 78 minutes. So that's 78 minutes to get in the marina, park, get your boat hooked off of your car and your truck, and get it in the water, get out to where you're going, and then maybe you're left with like 20 minutes to try to fish without the right gear for fishing in salt water, without the right boat for fishing in salt water, because that boat was a freshwater boat. It just doesn't make sense, does it? At 2:15, he calls Laci's cell phone and he leaves this message.
Hey, beautiful. I won't be able to get to Villa Farms to get that basket for Papa. I was hoping you would get this message and go on out there. I'll see you in a bit, sweetie. Love you. Bye.
He stops for gas at 3:25 and he calls Laci's phone again at 3:52, but he does not leave a voicemail this time. Bank records prove that he did purchase gas at the time, 3:25, when he said he did. From the Chevron station in Livermore, where he got gas, and his warehouse in Modesto, the drive would have been about 48 minutes. He says he arrived back at his warehouse around 4:15. He says he went inside for just about 5 minutes. At this point, he saw a fax from one of his distributors saying a shipment was coming, and he remembers being disappointed because the shipment was supposed to be arriving later than expected, and he was just in there long enough to see that fax. Now, the fax actually had arrived at his fax machine around 11:38 that morning, so it would have been faxed to the warehouse after he'd already left the marina, so he would have seen it when he came back, so that adds up. At this point, he basically detaches the boat from the truck, puts the boat back in the warehouse, closes the big rolly door, leaves through the normal entrance, and gets in his truck and goes home. He says he arrived home between 4:30 and 4:45 that evening, and that time does kind of make sense considering where he was coming from and what he was doing. When he got home, he realized that Laci's Land Rover was parked in the driveway, so he thought she was home, but when he went in, he discovered she wasn't there, but her purse and her keys and all her stuff was still there. He then saw that Mackenzie, the dog, was in the backyard with its leash on, so he went out to the backyard, he took the leash off the dog, brought the dog inside, and then he saw the bucket of mop water that was still there from when Laci had mopped the floor, allegedly, so he dumped that, and then he decided he was going to get cleaned up for a Christmas Eve dinner. He took his clothes off and put them in the washing machine. Okay, so a lot of people think it's suspicious that Scott washed his clothes as soon as he got home. And this is one of the things that I do not find suspicious, but that's just because of my point of reference. Scott says that he worked with a lot of chemicals and things at his warehouse often, and he knew he had a wife who was pregnant at home. So he would always come home and wash his clothes right away so he wouldn't, expose anything to the chemicals on his clothes. And he would wash them separately so as not to contaminate other clothes with things that were on his clothes. So when Scott got home and saw Laci wasn't there, he didn't assume she was gone or missing or something had happened to her. He just assumed that her mother had picked her up and brought her over to start helping with Christmas Eve dinner earlier. In my opinion, he didn't act strangely by just kind of going about his day. He got home, his clothes were wet from being out, they probably smelled, and he wanted to wash them, so he threw them in the washer. Now, the washer and dryer on the first floor of the house, so he didn't have to go upstairs to throw his clothes in. It was right there. My husband does the same thing. He's always in the garage working on his car, and then he'll come in and strip his clothes off before he even walks into the house, and then he throws them in the washer, usually by themselves, to just clean them before jumping in the shower. And it drives me crazy because I'm always like, could you have thrown any of the other 5 million things that were in the hamper just right over there, a foot away, and maybe made this a full load? But I guess men don't think like that sometimes, so it doesn't seem suspicious to me that he washed his clothes as if he was trying to get rid of evidence. He could have been washing his clothes to get rid of evidence, but at the same time, I think Scott Peterson was a little OCD. He got home and he dumped the mop bucket. He didn't want it just sitting there. Same thing my husband would have done, who's extremely OCD. He washes his clothes immediately. Same thing my husband does, and he's extremely OCD. When the cops came later to see Scott, Scott was super concerned with them parking in the driveway and opening their doors and possibly scratching his car. My husband will park literally at the other end of the parking lot so that nobody parks near his car, and then he gets furious when people do park next to his car, even though he parked so far away from everybody else. And I say they probably did it on purpose to annoy you because you're crazy. Also, when the cops were there the next day inside Scott's home and talking to him, he kept grabbing coasters to put under their drinks. So I think he was a little OCD. It doesn't seem off character for him. And my husband does it all the time, so it seems perfectly normal to me, but that's just my opinion. It's my point of reference. After he throws his clothes in the wash and he starts the cycle, he grabs some pizza. There's still the pizza box from last night on the counter, and he grabs some pizza out of there and starts eating it, pours himself a glass of milk, and he walks upstairs with his pizza and milk to take a shower. After he gets out of the shower, he gets dressed, he comes back downstairs, and he notices the light blinking on the answering machine, signifying there's some unheard messages there. So he hits play, and he hears his own message to Laci earlier, and then he hears a message from Laci's stepfather. Ron Gransky had called earlier that day to see if Laci and Scott could bring some whipped cream when they came for dinner that night because they were out of whipped cream and they needed it for the pies. That is when Scott started to be like, if she's not there and she's not here, where's she at? So he called the home of Sharon and Ron, and Sharon answered, and Scott asked her, is your daughter with you by any chance? And Sharon was like, no. And Scott's like, well, she's not here, and her car's here, and all her stuff's here, so Now, Sharon will say that Scott said immediately she was missing. Laci's missing. And it always struck people as odd as why, if you haven't seen your wife for an hour, would you immediately say she's missing? Scott claims he never said Laci was missing, just that her car was there and she wasn't, and he didn't know where she was. So at this point, Sharon says, okay, you go look for her. We're gonna call hospitals and call her friends. Scott goes out into the neighborhood with Mackenzie on the leash again and starts looking for Laci, wondering maybe if she fell somewhere, she's hurt, and knocking on neighbors' doors. And that's when the neighbor who actually put Mackenzie in the backyard tells Scott what happened, that she put Mackenzie in the backyard at 10:30. So Scott had a frame of reference to go on at that point, that Laci had probably been missing since 10:30 that morning, like right after he left to go to the warehouse. Laci's parents are calling her friends, calling everybody who might know her, calling the hospitals, like I said, and finally they just panic and Ron's like, I'm gonna call the police and report Laci missing. He calls 911 at about 5:47 p.m. and here is that call.
How can I help you?
Yes, my son-in-law called. He went playing golf this morning at 9:30. My daughter's been missing since this morning. She's 8 months pregnant. She took her dog for a walk in the park. The dog came home with just a leash on.
So the dog came back without your daughter? What is your name?
My name is Ron. I'm her stepdad.
Okay, what is your name? Your last
Ransky.
G-R-A-N-S-K-Y?
R-A-N-T-S-K-I. Her husband, Scott Peterson, is on his way over to the park to try to...
What's your stepdaughter's name?
Scott Peterson?
No, your stepdaughter.
Laci Peterson.
Laci, P-P-E-R-S-O-N, right?
P-E-T-E-R-S-O-N.
And she's white, black, Hispanic, Asian?
She's Portuguese and white.
How old is she?
She's 26.
What time did she leave the house and didn't come back?
That we don't know. We just got a call from our son-in-law that he left this morning at 9:30 to play golf. He just got home about a half hour ago. Nowhere around.
Okay, so she went to walk the dog where?
Walked it in that park, at the local park. What's that park over there with the call?
Once again, many people think it's odd or strange that Scott was not the one to report Laci missing. But in this situation, I don't think so. Scott was out in the neighborhood with the dog looking for Laci. Ron and Sharon were at home feeling helpless, only being able to call people and see if they could find Laci. So it makes sense that they were the ones to call 911. And you have to think, this wasn't hours and hours after she'd been missing and he knew she was missing. Scott got home between 4:30 and 4:45 and she was reported missing by Ron at 5:47. So this is an hour and 15 minutes tops. It's not as if Scott knew she was missing for days or even hours and never called the police, and then somebody was just like, we need to call the police and report her missing, like we need to do something. He would have, I'm sure, reported her missing no problem when he came home after looking for her. After Ron had reported her missing, the police met Scott Peterson and Sharon and Ron and Laci's friends who had all come out to show support and to look for her. They met them all at East La Lomas Park, and this was the park that Laci would usually take Mackenzie when she was walking. So they thought that this was a good place to start, especially after hearing from the neighbor that Mackenzie had been found with the leash on around 10:30. They all assumed, the police included, that something had happened to Laci while she was at the park. So they sent helicopters out so they could survey the park aerially and kind of see if she was there, if she'd fallen somewhere, if she was passed out. Everybody was looking for her. The entire neighborhood came out on Christmas Eve to look for this girl that they had become attached to. Everybody knew her in the neighborhood. She was friendly. She was pregnant. They were worried about her. So tons and tons of people came out initially to help. While the helicopters are looking in the park for Laci, the police ask Scott if they can look into his house, and he says, sure, no problem. He was very cooperative from the get-go. Cooperative and strangely calm. Very calm. Not like you'd think that a man whose pregnant wife was missing would be acting. Very Chris Watts-ish. Just kind of rolling with the punches, going with the flow. If you needed him for something, he was there. But he wasn't freaking out like, where is my wife? Where's my wife? She's pregnant with our child. She could be anywhere. She could be hurt. She could be passed out. What if she, started giving birth and she couldn't get help? What's going on? All her stuff is here. Like, panicked, Your wife and your unborn child are missing. They could be anywhere. She's left all her stuff here, so she didn't drive away. at least a little bit more worried, but he wasn't at all. And that is what made him stick out to the police in the first place. Detective Al Brocchini was one of the first people on the Peterson case, and he went through the Peterson home on Christmas Eve just to see if there was anything out of sorts, out of order, and he said no, it didn't seem like it. The house was very well kept, very nice, very clean. He just did notice one thing, which was the bed that Laci had made that morning. It was completely made perfectly, probably like my husband makes them, perfectly with hospital corners, not like how I make them, just throwing the blankets over the pillows. Perfectly made, but he noticed 2 indents at the bottom part of the bed on the comforter where it looked as if somebody may have been sitting. They then searched Scott's Ford F-150 and Laci's Land Rover, and they didn't really find anything in there either. All they found in Scott's truck was a couple patio umbrellas and a tarp. Now here's my question. Scott was loading the patio umbrellas into his truck that morning to bring them to the warehouse to store them. So why were they still in his truck later that day? He'd already come and gone to the warehouse. He forgot to take them out, or the patio umbrellas were just a cover to hide a body that was in the back of his truck. Just saying. Brocchini also does a cursory check of Scott's warehouse, but Scott tells him the power's out, so Brocchini had to shine his flashlight in. He just kind of looked to see if anything was out of sort, or maybe she was there. He didn't see anything, so he left. But he did call later on the power company to see when the power would be back on in that complex or in the warehouse, so he could go back and get a better look. And the power company told him, power's never been out there. We have no reported power outages in that area at all. Al Brocchini did find it strange that Scott didn't seem overly concerned with his wife's disappearance, and he also wanted to get the timeline straight, so he had Scott come in for an interview. It wasn't an interrogation. He says it was an interview to just solidify the timeline. But something about Scott and the whole situation kind of unsettled Brocchini, so he turned on the tape recorder, which he normally wouldn't have done in an interview with the spouse of a missing person. Brocchini asks Scott a couple of things. He asks, can we test your hands for gunshot residue? And Scott's like, yeah, of course. And he hands over his hands. At this point, Brocchini notices that there is a fresh cut on his finger, and Scott says, yeah, I got that cut today when I was reaching into my toolbox. Which, incidentally, whatever was taken off of Scott Peterson's hands that day was never tested for gunshot residue, so I don't know what the point in that was. But Brocchini also asks Scott if he will take a polygraph test, and Scott's like, yeah, I will. I'm exhausted tonight and I'm worried, so I just want to go home, but I will do it tomorrow. So he schedules a polygraph exam for the next day. Scott's also asked about his marriage. Is it a good marriage? Did you guys have issues? Did you fight? And Scott's like, yes, it was a good marriage. No, we didn't have issues. No, we didn't have a fight. Everything was fine. The next day, Christmas Day, 30 minutes before Scott is supposed to go to the police station and have his polygraph, he calls and he says, I talked to my dad. We don't think this is a good idea. I'm not going to take the polygraph exam. So what do you guys think? And tell me in the comments. Would you, if your spouse was missing or had been murdered, would you take a polygraph exam? Because I know they say not to, because polygraph exams are kind of not really scientifically proven and they can not be consistent in their results. So if the police already suspect you of something and then you take this polygraph and you're telling the truth but it shows you're lying, they might have more to come after you with, even though the results of a polygraph are not admissible in court. And there's a reason for that, because they're not really true. I always thought that the willingness to take a polygraph showed more about your innocence or guilt than actually the results, but I don't know if I would take a polygraph if my husband was missing or murdered, because I just feel like it's their way of psyching you out and using it against you in interrogation. So they'll bring it in, they'll be like, you failed the polygraph. We saw this with West Memphis 3, you failed the polygraph, what are you hiding? You're guilty. And I think they use it against you, so I don't know if I would take it necessarily. But what do you guys think? Let me know. So the media picked up the scent of this case on December 26th. And basically it was, the media camped out in front of the Peterson home the entire day, the entire night. They didn't leave. This was right when the 24-hour media coverage on TV was happening. And it was not uncommon for networks to do things like this, to try to fill the space, to try to fill 24 hours of news. So they would get footage of Scott walking his dog, Scott getting the mail, Scott getting in his truck, truck and they were just there all the time, I happen to think it would be really obnoxious, especially if you were innocent and your wife was missing. But for some reason, Scott avoided the media completely, which they all thought was strange because typically a spouse or family member of somebody who was missing would want to get in front of the cameras as often as possible to get the word out there, to bring awareness to this missing person, to implore whoever had them to bring them back, please. But he did not want to be on the camera at all. He didn't want pictures taken of him. He would always come out, wearing sunglasses and a hat and like turn his head away from the camera and just trying to avoid getting his picture out there at all. Now at this point, neighbors and people in the general area were being questioned, and there were quite a bit of reports of people who said they saw Laci walking her dog that morning, December 24th. There was at least 12 reports of people who saw Laci, but only 3 of them were actually followed up with, and only with phone calls, never in person. The reason these sightings are so important is because if people saw Laci walking her dog after 9:30 on that morning, and there was proof that Scott was on his way to his warehouse, which there was, he couldn't have been responsible for her disappearance and her subsequent murder. So a lot of people think that the police ignored these reports and didn't follow up on them because they were so zeroed in on Scott as being the person who had done this. They were so sure of it that they just thought that they didn't have to place too much stock in people who actually saw Laci that day. I'm gonna place a visual aid for you here, which shows the blue dot, which is the Peterson home, and all the red dots are the places that Laci was spotted that morning. There was some speculation at one point that these sightings were all of a different pregnant woman in the same area, and that it wasn't Laci at all. It was this pregnant woman who would also walk her golden retriever every single day in the area. But it came out that that woman, she had given birth in October. So in December, she would have no longer been pregnant. And she says she's 99.9% sure that she did not go out the morning of Christmas Eve. And even if she had gone out for a walk that morning, she was no longer pregnant. Homer Maldonado states that he saw Laci walking her dog between 9:45 and 10 a.m. on the morning of Christmas Eve, and this was about half a mile from the Peterson home. He says he slowed down to take a good look, which is creepy. What are you slowing down to take a good look of? And he says he remembers this because of how pregnant she was. Homer swears up and down that it couldn't have been anybody else, that this was Laci Peterson. He reported this to the police on January 1st, but he was never followed up with. Vivian Mitchell, who lives roughly 10 blocks away from the Petersons, she said she also saw Laci that morning walking her dog. Vivian says she knows it was Laci because she and her husband had seen Laci walking the dog before, and Laci was so pretty, you couldn't duplicate that. There couldn't be somebody you could mistake for Laci Peterson. She reported that to the police as well. She was given a phone call 3 weeks later, and then nothing else. On December 26th, Al Brocchini goes back to the Peterson home, and he brings with him somebody he called in for backup, another detective named John Bueller. At this point, they are suspicious of Scott, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one being when a person dies or goes missing, 9 times out of 10, it's the spouse or somebody very close to them. Also, they thought it was strange that Scott would agree to take the polygraph and then back out of it at the last minute. And just in general, the way he was acting, so cool and calm and collected, didn't fit with how somebody should be acting when their pregnant wife was missing. So they went there again to speak with him and to see if they could check the house again. They asked him, "Do you mind if we come in and look at the house again?" And he said, "I don't mind, but hold on, let me call my lawyer and check." Now, the police claim that when they went in and asked to look in the house again, he immediately said no, that he didn't think that was a good idea. But Scott claims he said yes, he didn't mind, but he was going to call his lawyer. But then the lawyer took so long to get back to him, and the police got impatient. So they just pulled out the warrant, and they were like, "Listen, we already have a warrant to search your house and your cars and your warehouse. We just want to see what you would say, so step aside, please." Something I found out is that Scott, 2 days after his wife goes missing, has already lawyered up. And to me, that does look suspicious. I mean, he probably knew that they thought he was a suspect for this, so maybe he was just trying to get ahead of it. And they took both vehicles with them to check. They took Scott's F-150 and they took Laci's Land Rover. They also confiscated his boat from his warehouse, and they checked in his warehouse again. The police department held a press conference to ask anybody in the public who had possibly seen Scott's truck, and they showed pictures of Scott's truck, and they said, "If you've seen this in or around the area of the Berkeley Marina, please let us know because we're trying to solidify this story." And somebody in the audience was like, well, is Scott Peterson a suspect right now? And the police said, we cannot talk about that at this point. So obviously, now everybody thinks that Scott Peterson is a suspect. And it doesn't get a good response from the public in general. They just start going after him. And both Scott's parents and Laci's parents came to his defense. Laci's mother said, listen, if you knew Scott and how much he loved my daughter, you would never be saying this about him. I have never heard them say an angry word to each other. I've never heard them fight. I've never even heard them say a mean word about each other to anybody else. They were a partnership. They had a good marriage. They had absolutely no doubt that Scott wasn't involved in whatever had happened to Laci. But then on December 30th, something happened that would throw everyone for a loop. A young woman named Amber Fry called the police and told them that she'd been having a relationship with Scott Peterson for over a month, that he had never told her he was married. Now, the way that Scott and Amber met is a fairy tale romance for the ages. Scott was in Fresno for business at a hotel, and in the hotel bar, he started hitting on a woman who was sitting at the bar by asking her what her favorite sexual positions were. And she was like, whoa, slow down, cowboy. I'm involved in a relationship already, but hey, I know somebody that you might like. And the somebody that Scott might like, that this woman wanted to introduce him to, was her best friend, Amber Fry. Now tell me, why are you setting your best friend up with the creepy guy at the bar who tried hitting on you with a pickup line of asking you what your favorite sexual positions are? Amber was a 27-year-old massage therapist living in Fresno with her 2-year-old daughter. She was a single mother, and she'd just been looking for somebody to settle down with and give her life some sort of stability when her friend set her up on a blind date with Scott Peterson. When Scott showed up at Amber's door to take her out for their first date, she says she was pleasantly surprised by how handsome and normal and charming he was. And she said it was cute because he was nervous. He said he'd had butterflies in his stomach on his way to pick her up. They'd planned to go to dinner, but Scott said, oh, I've been working all day. I just want to get out of these clothes into something fresh and look nice for you and get cleaned up. So let's make a stop at my hotel really quick so I can, get freshened up. When they got to his hotel room, Scott had already set it up with a bottle of champagne chilling and red roses, and they toasted to their new future and blossoming relationship. And, I just find it so hard to believe that this girl didn't at this point see this guy was like a creeper, right? He's a creeper. You just met him, and before he even brings you to dinner, he's got you in his hotel room. After drinking their champagne, they went to dinner, and then they went to a karaoke bar, and they sang a duet, and they slow danced until the bar closed down, and then they went back to Scott's hotel room where Amber spent the night. He told her he was single, and he was looking for the right person to settle down with. He said he really wanted a committed relationship, but he had no interest in having kids. It was fine that she already had a child. He didn't mind, but he didn't want any kids of his own. He was just too busy. He worked too much. He was out of town too much. Amber was a 27-year-old girl who had not had a lot of luck in the love department. Once she had dated an older married man, and that didn't end well. And then she got pregnant by another guy who left her when he found out she was pregnant. And now she was, just a single mother trying to raise a young daughter. She put herself through school. She became a massage therapist. And she just wanted someone to share that with that would bring stability to her life and her daughter's life. Scott was handsome and charming. He was sweet. He gave her roses. He told her he got butterflies in his stomach when he was coming to pick her up. He had a good job, so she figured, he probably had a little bit of money. He seemed to have it all together, and she didn't really second guess why it was going as quickly as it was, I guess. Their first date was on November 20th, and they stayed in touch. They talked on the phone a lot, but he told her he lived in Sacramento, and she lived in Fresno, so they couldn't see each other often. In fact, from November to the end of their relationship, he only actually physically saw her in person a handful of times, but they did talk on the phone every single day. He came back to Fresno to see her on December 2nd, and he took Amber and her daughter hiking and then brought them back home and cooked them dinner. This is so Chris Watts to me, right? Completely living a double life. I mean, the only difference really is that Nicole Kessinger knew that Chris was married, but he told her, allegedly, that he was separated from his wife, whereas Scott initially told Amber, he'd never been married at all. But on December 9th, that changed. He called her and he told her he had something important to tell her, and could he come over? He came over to her house and he dropped the bomb on her there. He said, I haven't been completely honest with you. I was married, but I lost my wife. This same day, December 9th, before going to Amber's house to tell her that he lost his wife, he purchased his secret boat. But of course, we know Scott didn't lose his wife. And what does lose your wife mean? Any normal person would take that to mean that your wife has died, right? That's how Amber took it, and that's why she didn't really press him anymore for the details, because he said it was too painful to talk about, too fresh. He couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. We know that Laci was very much alive on December 9th. And she was very much alive on December 14th when Scott returned to Fresno with 3 dozen red roses. Man, this guy loves his roses. Brought her champagne, and they drank the champagne, and then he took her to a Christmas party. That same evening, Laci attended a Christmas party in Modesto by herself. That night, Amber asked Scott Peterson, "Can I trust you with my whole heart?" And Scott responded, "You already know the answer to that." It's so vague, right? He's so vague. He almost does this whole vague, generalized thing. You know, instead of saying, "Yes, you can trust me with your whole heart," he's trying not to lie. That's what a liar does. A liar doesn't want to come right out and say anything that can then be brought back on them later. So he says, "I lost my wife." He doesn't say, "My wife died." He doesn't say, "My wife and I got divorced." He doesn't say, "I'm about to kill my wife." He says, "I lost my wife." That could mean anything, right? If she came back later and she was like, "I thought you said you lost your wife," he could say, "I did lose her, you know, like we were separated emotionally, so I felt like she died. I felt like I'd lost her." She asks, "Can I trust you with my whole heart?" And he says, "You already know the answer to that." He's so vague, and he does it on purpose, but it's so sketchy and so scummy. Scott spent that night at Amber's, and the next day he said he had to leave and go to Maine for work, and then he was going to be traveling to Europe for work. So he wasn't really able to see her for a little while, but he said, "When I get back, I will answer any questions you have and we'll talk more about this." Right now, it's just so raw. This is the first Christmas that I'm going to be spending without my wife, and it's just too hard to talk about it right now. But after the holidays, after I get back from Europe, we will talk about it because I care about you. Amber did ask Scott where he lived or if he had an address that she could send a Christmas present to him since they wouldn't see each other over the holidays, and he gave her a P.O. box in Modesto, California, which gave her pause because he told her he lived in Sacramento. Why do you have a P.O. box in Modesto? On December 23rd, while Scott was with his wife, the last full day of her life that she would be alive, he called Amber and said he was in Maine duck hunting with his father. She did not hear from him on the 24th or the 25th, but on the 26th, she called him. He had told her that he was flying to Paris that morning, but she wanted to call and leave a sweet message on his voicemail anyways. But she was so surprised when he picked up, right? Because he should have been on a plane, shouldn't have been able to pick up his phone. And she was like, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in New York." And she said, "Well, aren't you supposed to be on a plane? Like, did you miss your plane? What's going on?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm supposed to be, but..." And she's like, "But what? Why didn't you tell me that you were in New York? If you didn't fly to Paris, why would you not call me? Why wouldn't you tell me that you were in New York? What's going on?" Well, what was going on is he was under the scrutiny of the police department at that time. They were like on top of his ass. And, you know, he probably didn't feel comfortable calling you, and maybe he thought you saw him on the news. But Amber didn't see him on the news. She didn't watch the news. She had no idea what was going on. After the whole "I'm in New York, but I told you I was going to be in Paris" thing, but I'm actually right here in California still, not that far from you, Amber starts to get more suspicious. That little nagging feeling that had told her for a couple days now that something was off started growing. So she actually called a friend of hers who was a police officer with the Fresno Police Department, and she had him look into Scott, which might seem crazy to some of you guys out there, but I think it's brilliant. I mean, don't lie to women if you don't want us to ask our cop friends to look into you. She figured her friend would just come back and say, like, "Yeah, he's married, you know, sorry." But she did not expect what she would hear from her friend, the police officer in Fresno, when he called her at 1:40 in the morning on December 29th. And he gave her a phone number and said, "You need to call this phone number and talk to them." And that phone number was for the Modesto Police Department. So we are going to end part 1 here because I'm sure there is like 2 hours of footage that I have to edit through and try to get it down to a place where it won't take 25 hours to upload.